I want to just give an overarching view of what was the thinking behind the development of the strategy, what we have done so far, and the first results that perhaps are starting to appear. The strategy was sort of started about a year ago, and we have some initial ideas on whether it's working or not. Well, Maria Iglesias presented very clearly the reasons why we are needing a geriatric strategy, so I will not go through this again. But for us, it's a high priority area, and we intend to pay close attention to it. Now, we have looked at the initial findings in the dossiers that we have approved recently from mid-2009 to 2011 to have a sort of a baseline. And for conditions who are mainly indicated for the elderly population, we can see that the total number of elderly patients is quite reasonable. But this drops for conditions that are, could be labeled as non-elderly, although we could say that some of these conditions are really important in the aging population, and like, for example, influenza vaccines or antidepressants. So I think that these slides can tell us that it is possibly not so difficult to find some elderly patients in the clinical trials, as sometimes it is claimed, because for the elderly indications, they are found, and that also there is clearly room for improvement for the very old patients that are underrepresented in both cases. Now, in 2010, Christina Dander in the next session will speak much more in detail about that. There was an addition of a question and answer document to the ICH7 guideline, and this was to address the inclusion of older old patients in the clinical trials, to indicate that an appropriate representation should be sought, and to consider the inclusion of comorbidities, and to design trials which may have age-specific endpoints if this is indicated. So Christina will go much more in detail in this. Now, the strategy we have developed is based on two principles. One is the one that we apply to all registrations of medicines. The medicines should be of high quality and appropriately researched and evaluated for use in the population which is intended for use, so evidence-based medicine. The second point is to improve the availability of information on the use of medicines for older people, and here we mean both information to the prescriber and information to the patients, because both are important to make the medicine safer, more effective, and used more appropriately. There will be a session tomorrow on information to patients. Now, the approach that we have taken is to see whether we could have down-to-earth achievable actions that could have a practical impact and a direct impact without having to change too much the way we work. So to integrate and better use the tools we already have into the day-to-day work of the agency. And as Professor Razi said, in many cases, older people constitute the main population of use of a drug. So from industry, well, we asked that guidelines that are there, and we had a look at them in 2006 in a project that was mandated to us to the European Commission, and we are looking again now. These guidelines, in many cases, cover reasonably the needs of development in the older population. If you have better ideas or innovative ideas, discuss those in a scientific advice or other fora that we offer, so that we can have a common understanding on how to proceed. On the part of the regulators is to focus and to better coordinate the activities we have, so that we do not forget about old people that will use the drugs that we approve. The questions that we need to ask ourselves are: which studies have been carried out? Are they in line with the current guidelines, which, as I said, in many cases are rather sufficient, but we will discuss also this later on in the day. Can the relevant information be found in the EMA approval documents? Because in many cases, we do have information submitted in the dossiers, but we do not explain both the scientific evaluation process and the information that we would like to pass on to the prescriber and the patient sufficiently in our approval documents. Again, tomorrow there will be presentations concerning this point. Also, we need to ask ourselves, are there further needs that we haven't thought about that we need to address? What would the prescribers, the patients, and even the health technology assessment bodies like to know? We have had a pharmacovigilance survey conducted this year, and there are indications that for the older population, which weighs heavily in terms of costs on the healthcare systems, that would be important to provide correct information on what we have seen in the dossiers. So, overall, how can we improve the evaluation process? Now, the key points of the strategy are four. The first one was to identify gaps in the regulatory and scientific knowledge and to take appropriate measures to tackle them. On the part of the CHMP, there has been extensive discussion in defining the strategy that we wanted to tackle, and this was adopted last year in March. Additionally, the specific issue of frailty has been mandated for an analysis to the Geriatric Expert Group, which is a group that was established this year. And they have worked on definition and scales, and we will have, again, presentations in more detail about this. The Pharmacovigilance Working Party had a dedicated session during the Polish presidency, which was a half day of discussions on geriatric issues. They have come up with points that they would like to further consider. As I mentioned, they had a survey conducted in between their members to identify both geriatric activities and instruments or lack of instruments at the national and European level. So we have had indications of what is going on across Europe and what the members of the Pharmacovigilance Working Party would like to do. This workshop is part of the identification of gaps because we would like to hear from our stakeholders whether we are moving in the right directions or what is further needed as actions. Scientific advice is increasingly paying attention to the need of older people and to on how we can design trials appropriately to demonstrate the benefit-risk balance in this population. We provide comments during both the drafting and the revision of guidelines. And this is both when the process is being carried on internally, and also the Geriatric Expert Group is asked to comment when the guidelines are released for public consultation. Last point is we are looking at formulations and measures that we could take to improve adherence, both in terms of formulations and packaging. The second point was to foster a relevant expert pool. As I mentioned, a geriatric expert group was established in May 2011. It's a virtual group who operates mainly by teleconference. We had 4 teleconferences to date, and I'm happy to welcome here most of all the members of the group that are present here today. The third point was to look at the fact whether the development takes into account specific safety and efficacy aspects related to aging in accordance with the current guidelines and particularly the ICH 7. So again, as I mentioned, the scientific advice. Then the EMA provides specific comments on geriatric aspects at the stage of peer review, which is sort of, for those who are not very familiar, midway through the evaluation process. We have modified in October both the assessment report template, so the template which creates the structure by which products are assessed, and the template for the risk management to include specific geriatric aspects. We expect that these modifications and focus in the assessment report template will help to improve the quality of the information that is present in the SMPC, package leaflet, and the EPAR in time, as these products that have been commented will reach the opinion stage. And as I already mentioned, in guideline drafting and revision. Now, the changes in the assessment report took place in October 2011, and they're both in the template and in the guidance for the assessors. They're in line with the spirit of the ICH 7, and the aim is to focus the attention of the reviewer on the geriatric data, the amount of data, the context and the indication, and any missing information that there may be. So we asked to include a clear description of epidemiology in relation to age. We have added demographic tables both for the efficacy and the safety sections. We asked to describe the pharmacokinetics or the absence of pharmacokinetics in this population, to look more critically at any need for dose adjustments if needed. to consider specifically the risk-benefit analysis in this population and to discuss whether concurrent pharmacotherapy was allowed in the clinical development product, especially when a potentiation of adverse event could be expected in the new drug profile in combination with concurrently administered drugs. On the in terms of the risk management plan, we ask to comment on the robustness of the collection of data and how these are summated to avoid a signal dilution. The last point is the consideration for the need of specific pharmacovigilance activities. Tomorrow, again, there is a session specific to pharmacovigilance. As I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, well, the post-authorization activities are important, and we recognize that the recruitment in clinical trials is difficult, but is it really so difficult, or should some effort additional should be made to recruit those patients pre-authorization? Whether any specific consideration of undesirable effects which could be more important or affect more severely the older population is necessary, for example, sedation, orthostatic and cardiovascular effects. We're trying to look into signal detection and underreporting of adverse events and how we can improve the situation in this respect. Again, tomorrow there will be discussion in this. And concerning the pharmacovigilance survey that was conducted, we have realized that in several countries there are lists of preferred medicines for older people. They are both based on safety and efficacy considerations, but also on cost considerations. Additionally, it was pointed out that adaptation of packaging, of formulations, of the way that the patient information leaflet is structured in terms of clarity, messages to the older population, and fonts should be improved, and also the necessity to educate and to try to improve the way that adverse events are reported and to facilitate the adverse event reporting on the part of older people. Some initial results that we can start to see, although due to the approval process, none of the products that we had an intervention on has yet reached an opinion stage, is the fact that we have developed a tool to track the impact of the strategy, so to create a baseline of before we started these activities. Concerning the assessment, in terms, we are checking 100% of the list of questions, and wherever it is appropriate, we comment. So we have sent comments on 60 products from the middle of 2010, and the majority of this was endorsed within the list of questions. So hopefully, if there was missing information or the information was reported in a incomplete manner, we can have a more clear representation of what is happening. Concerning the guidelines, again, we are commenting internally and at the public consultation stage. And for scientific advice, we have had ad hoc involvement whenever it was raised as a specific topic of interest during the advice requests. In terms of better information to patients and prescribers, we now have these tables by the age brackets of ICH-7, both for safety and efficacies. So we expect that an improvement or a focus of the information on the SMPC and package leaflets will come once these products will be approved. In terms of post-authorizations, there was the already mentioned informal pharmacovigilance session in Warsaw. And for formulations, we are developing with our quality colleagues internal processes to include comments both at the time of provision of scientific advice and of the list of questions to see whether the formulation and the packaging are appropriate for the population that will use the drug. So all of these were actions that integrate the thinking of the needs of the older population within the existing processes of the EMA. As Ms. Roth-Berendt mentioned, we need to see whether we need to go further than that, whether we will have an impact in managing to shift the thinking and the actions we are taking. But I would like to take this opportunity to thank for the dedication and commitment all the colleagues in the committees and within the EMA that have participated with enthusiasm to this initiative. Thank you very much.